Hello, my name is Christopher Lacayo, and I am doing my battle on the Battle of Champion Hill. The Battle of Champion Hill was also known as the Battle of Baker's Creek. Now, the Battle of Champion Hill isn't a well known battle. Personally, I really didn't know much about this battle. I actually didn't know anything about this battle at all um, until I did this project. And then I realized this battle's significance. This battle was vital in securing the securing Vicksburg in the Vicksburg campaign. And some historians even go as far as to say that without the Battle of Champion Hill, that the Union Army wouldn't win the Civil War. Now, the Battle of Champions Hill, also known as the Battle of Baker's Creek, was a battle that took place in Hinds County, Mississippi. Now, the date took place on May 16th, 1863, just several days prior, after the Union came off of a huge victory versus the Confederate Army in Jackson, Mississippi. And for those of you that don't know, Jackson, Mississippi is the capital of Mississippi. So this was a huge Union victory to basically secure a southern state's capital. Now, the Battle of Champion Hill was part of the Vicksburg campaign. And the Vicksburg campaign, what it basically was a series of battles and attacks that were in the Western Theater. And President Lincoln appointed Ulysses S. Grant as the leader of the Vicksburg campaign. Now, Lincoln believed that capturing Vicksburg would be key to winning the Civil War. Vicksburg was a place in which many Confederate goods were shipped. Some of the goods that were shipped out of Vicksburg were sugar, beef, and lead. So you can only imagine if you invade Vicksburg and you take away food and ammo, what you're going to be left with is some starving soldiers without any ammo, which is not good for any soldiers on that side of the war. Now, the goal of the Vicksburg campaign was to occupy Vicksburg, Mississippi. This was basically a stronghold that supplied a majority of Confederate goods. Like I said, food, ammo. That's all super important stuff when you're supplying an army. Now, the head commanders that led in the Battle of Champion Hill. Ulysses S. Grant, he was the lead commander of the Union Army. Now, a couple facts about Ulysses S. Grant. He served in the Mexican-American War. He was known as a fierce combatant. And so Ulysses S. Grant was known as a fierce combatant. And he actually wasn't one of the most popular generals amongst his men. He was actually a very unliked general amongst his men that fought under him. Some of his men even went as far as contacting Lincoln himself and asking for the removal of Ulysses Grant. However, Lincoln stated that he could not spare Ulysses Grant because he was a fighter, and his intense fighting style is basically what earned him a lot of respect in the office. He led the Vicksburg campaign. After the Civil War, Ulysses S. Grant was appointed to Secretary of War. After he was the Secretary of War, he served as the 18th U.S. President. Now, as for John C. Pemberton, John C. Pemberton was the Confederate leader who was basically in charge of the Confederate Army at the time of the Battle of Champion Hill. Now, John C. Pemberton was born in Pennsylvania. So, Pennsylvania is actually a northern state, and he wasn't a Southerner. He didn't have any family that was from the South, so he wasn't born with Southern ideologies until he met his Virginian wife, and that's where he actually got his Southern influence. He was a West Point graduate, and West Point is actually one of the most prestigious military schools that you could go to, still even to this day it is. Now, John C. Pemberton, like Ulysses S. Grant, also served in the Mexican-American War. Now, Ulysses S. Grant and John Pemberton, although they were the lead commanders of their armies during the Battle of Champion Hill, they were not the only commanders in the battle. There were also several other commanders that were in charge of their own platoons. Some of the key Union commanders that were key in leading the Union to a victory at Battle of Champion Hill was William T. Sherman, James McPherson, and John McClernand. Some of the southern key Confederate commanders was Carter Stevenson, John Bowen, William Loring, and Lloyd Tillman. 2 days before the Battle of Champion Hill, the Union Army defeated the Confederate Army and occupied the capital of Mississippi, which was Jackson. Now the Union Army was marching from Jackson, basically to Vicksburg, and as you can see, John Pemberton has assembled a 3-mile line with his generals Bowen, Stevenson, and Loring, and basically they are anticipating attacks from this street and this street. What they don't know is that there's a third platoon that's coming, that's marching up Jackson Road, and if this whole left flank is left unprotected, then this whole side will be decimated. Now, once Stevenson's men got news of the third platoon marching down Jackson Road, Stevenson's men immediately kind of watered down their line and formed 2 more lines, which are right here. And those lines did not hold up. They were basically crushed and decimated by the Union Army, and they were forced to retreat back. Right here is basically after the Union is closing in on the Confederates, you can see some of the Confederate soldiers beginning to fall back. Now, there is a brief glimmer of hope for the Confederates when Bowen's platoon steps up and they kind of ward off the Union attack for at least a little while. They push them back, and then a reinforcement from the Union comes in and wipes them out. Now, let's look at the statistics of the Battle of Champion Hill. Now, the total of forces engaged, there was 54,000 total soldiers on the battlefield. 32,000 were Union soldiers, while 22,000 of those soldiers were Confederate. Now, the total estimated casualties is at 6,297. There were 6,297 deaths. 2,457 of those deaths were Union soldiers. 3,840 of those deaths were Confederate soldiers. Now, the result in this battle was a Union victory. Now, this battle eventually led to Vicksburg, where the Union's campaign succeeded in them basically occupying Vicksburg. Now that we've learned about the Battle of Champion Hill, let's do a little Q&A. My first question is, before this discussion in class, have you ever heard of the Battle of Champion Hill? My second question to you is, how would the Confederate Army have been affected if the Union Army occupied Vicksburg? To answer the first question, I've never heard of Champion Hill before this presentation, but after doing this presentation, I realized how important this battle was in basically in occupying Vicksburg. Without the Battle of Champion Hill, Vicksburg probably wouldn't have been occupied. And without occupying Vicksburg, who knows if the Civil War would have been won by the Union? To answer the second question, how would the Confederate Army have been affected if the Union Army occupied Vicksburg? Now, President Lincoln suggested that if the Union Army had occupied Vicksburg, this would take a massive hit on the Confederates' war supplies, such as lead and food. And without lead and food, you just have starving soldiers with no ammo, which would be no good for the Confederates. Thank you for watching my presentation.